Hi, and welcome to the webinar. This is Steve Torsa. I'm the founder and managing director of Wholesale Investor. Today I've got with me Professor Colin McLeod from the Wade Institute of Entrepreneurship. Colin is a professor at the Melbourne Business School and executive director of the Melbourne Entrepreneurial Centre, which includes the university's accelerator and incubator programs, as well as a range of education programs. He's a director, investor, co-founder of early-stage companies in retail technology, education technology, health and safety, wireless technology, and also wearable biotechnology. And the purpose of this call is that, one of the questions I've been asking myself lately is that, WI, we've always believed in empowerment, we've always believed in education. And the question from our side is how do we actually provide more education to our investors or give access to more education to our investors in the area of venture investment? Because it is such a niche area and it's such a unique area. And now that, we've now got a database of 22,000 and we've watched our own ecosystem double in the last 2.5 years. So I thought this would be a valuable opportunity for us to spend some time and to sort of, I suppose, ask more deeply about the programs that are being run by the Wade Institute so that people can get sort of more awareness. So to start off, Professor Colin, it would be great to get a bit more about your background and how this sort of, I suppose, why this is such a driver for you.
Thanks, Steve, and good afternoon. You've given a pretty good introduction to my current activities, but I actually started off in a very traditional corporate career. When I left the university, I went and worked for General Motors, worked for Telstra, worked for Goldman Sachs, J. Weir, and actually ended up working at the AFL. So I've worked across quite a range of industries. But I've had a parallel academic career, and that's taken me to working in Silicon Valley in the 90s when I was doing my PhD, and my PhD was in commercialising innovation. That sort of got me interested in startups, probably 20, 25 years ago, I guess. And I've had an ongoing interest ever since. I think more recently that it's become pretty obvious that Australia is a sort of pivot point in its economic growth. I think you would know better than me, most of the money that we see in Australia comes out of the ground or we grow it, particularly from an export perspective. And in the long run, that's not a sustainable model. So I think the other thing is that we also see a lot of Australian innovation where the value of that innovation is actually seen overseas. So you think about things like Wi-Fi. I'm not sure how many people know it was actually invented in Australia. Things like plastic lenses in eyeglasses, invented in Australia. Things like ultrasound facilities.
It's amazing when you do a look and research to find out all the different things that were actually invented in Australia, even refrigerator, even the fridge, as an example.
Yeah. Look, it's fascinating, and I think with a name like McLeod, I've obviously got a good Scottish heritage, so I should acknowledge that penicillin was discovered by a Scotsman. But the ability to manufacture it in industrial strength and industrial volume was actually discovered by an Australian. And it may in fact be the greatest invention in the history of the world because of its impact on saving people's lives. And yet when you look at Australia's economy, it's pretty much the same as it was 50 to 100 years ago. Our stock exchange is sort of dominated by the same companies that were there 40 or 50 years ago. If you compare that to America, in the US, almost 50% of the public companies in the US started as venture-backed companies. Now, when you figure venture capital has only been around about 40 or 50 years, maybe 40 years, that's a massive change that's happened because of the application of venture capital to new ideas.
And I suppose the first question I'll have for you is, it'd be great to get a bit more awareness. What is the VC Catalyst program that you're involved in?
So the VC Catalyst program was actually based on an initiative from Launch Vic, which is a Victorian government agency, and they spoke to the Wade Institute about adopting some of the educational programs that are used in Silicon Valley. So even in a fairly mature market, there's still a very active educational program, even for experienced investors, I guess. And in Australia, we have pretty clear evidence that our venture capital market is, I guess, under-resourced and probably undereducated. And so we developed the VC Catalyst program to provide education to people who put money into venture capital funds predominantly. So it may be some people who want to invest directly in early stage companies, but we think more likely it'll be people who want to invest in funds that invest in early stage companies.
Interesting. And who is the program typically aimed at?
Look, we think it'll be people who are active investors, but there might be people who are new to startup investing. We think there's already some angel investors, family offices, high net worth people. We're also seeing a lot of entrepreneurs, I guess, who have had some success and made some money, and now looking at reinvesting in early stage startups, and they're looking for, I guess, a more structured way to understand what venture capital actually is.
I think that's a really good point. And I think that's one thing that we've noticed a lot as well. Like, let's say sort of 2015 onwards, like I put down a turning point for this space, around September 2015. And the reason being when sort of Malcolm Turnbull come into power and mentioned the words innovation, all of a sudden those doors that, in our talks I talk about, all founders really need is a door to be slightly opened, and it's our job to sort of create that opportunity. But I've noticed the interest in, ESVC LP funds, that different Essex schemes, and also just the different funder funds and different investment groups that have come out of sort of, I suppose, founders that have successfully exited businesses or been, or sort of listed their businesses on the ASX and now looking to, reinvest back into the ecosystem. We've noticed a big upturn in interest in the space.
I think that's 100% right, and I think when you look at almost any successful, entrepreneurial ecosystem around the world, what we have seen is the early stage investors coming back in, or the early stage successful innovation companies coming back in as both investors, but they tend to be, I guess you'd call it, roll your sleeves up and get your hands dirty investors. They want a mentor, they want to be a friend, they want to be a potential customer. So it's quite a different style of investing.
And so why do you feel there's a need for further education? Like, what are you seeing in the marketplace from the investor side?
I think what we see is a pretty clear lack of understanding of what venture capital is and how it operates, how a venture capital fund is structured, what a good mandate looks like. As you know from your own experience, one of the long-standing discussions in venture capital is, do you back the jockey or the horse? And even that simple discussion is, I guess, not well informed and not well reasoned, and it's not sort of backed up by a lot of evidence in Australia. And yet, when we look overseas, there's a very clear understanding of the sort of returns you get from venture capital and where the money's made, if you like.
And who are the faculty and guest speakers in the program?
Well, we've got a number of people coming from overseas. One name which might be familiar to a lot of your listeners is actually an Australian guy at Stanford called George Foster. George has been at Stanford for almost 40 years. He's one of the best-known figures in entrepreneurship and finance and venture capital in Silicon Valley. George is a regular back to Australia, and so he's coming out. A guy who's probably less well known in Australia but is regarded as one of the leaders in venture capital education is a guy called Pedram Mokriam. It would take me too long to go through Pedram's CV, but he's got a very deep tech background. But he's been heavily involved in education programs at places like Berkeley, Stanford, and INSEAD, and Columbia, all aimed at venture capital education. And in fact, a lot of the programs that I was mentioning earlier, where there's still a very strong appetite in Silicon Valley for investor education, are delivered through Pedram. We also have an Australian woman called Nisha Dua. Nisha recently had the honour of ringing the closing bell at NASDAQ, and the reason she was asked to do that was to recognise her contribution to female founders. So Nisha is one of the co-founders of a fund called BBG Ventures, which is built by girls. And Nisha's sort of found that there's a real appetite a real need, not just an appetite, but a real need to support female founders, particularly in tech products. We've also got a woman called Jules Miller, who's nowadays a partner with IBM Blockchain. But Jules is an expert on an emerging form of venture investment called venture debt. So we're getting some exposure to, I guess, the most up-to-date suite of venture investing products.
So we've actually had some more and more conversations around the venture debt area. It seems to look like it's going to be a sort of growing area in Australia over the next sort of 12 to 24 months.
I think that's right. I think once again, as the market grows and starts to mature and people can start to offer different products, we'll find that there will be better alignment, I guess, between the needs of the founders and the products that are available in the venture market.
So really with the program, you've done your best to make sure that the faculty and the guest speakers are people that are investors in the marketplace today, providing, I suppose, real-world experience, uncovering, I suppose, sectors which they're looking at right now as opposed to, 2 to 5 years ago. It's the latest information for people to be able to get access to.
Absolutely. I couldn't sum it up better myself. And I should say that one of the features of the program is the access to mentors, and even just talking about the sort of people who have offered themselves to be mentors to this program, it might give you some idea of, I guess, how important well-known people in the market are seeing this. So one of the mentors is Jodie Oster, who's the GM of Uber Eats, Jane Martino, who's the GM of Light Warrior Ventures, who is one of the co-founders of Smiling Mind and Unlocked. James Tynan, who's the CEO of StartMate, probably one of Australia's best incubator programs.
Yeah,
people like Amanda Price, who's the head of High Growth Ventures at KPMG. So these are people sort of putting their time and effort in just as mentors to provide support to people who come on the program.
Now, where can people actually apply, I suppose, either to get more information or to understand more about the programs?
The best place to go is to Wade Institute as one word .org.au/VC Catalyst /.
Okay, and what we'll do as part of
but
it...
if they just went to the Wade Institute, they'd find that on the front page, I'm sure.
Brilliant, and as I mentioned, we'll provide the link to the listeners as well, so they can actually get access to it. Now, that'd be great, because we do think it's an important program, and we do think that there's a real need for it, and we do think that as an economy, but also as individual investors, there are some real untapped opportunities here. We just need to understand more about how to take advantage of them. And when do people need to apply by?
Pretty soon. The program actually starts in just over 2 weeks, so it starts on Monday, the 18th of March.
Okay, fantastic. Well, look, we'll obviously provide that information. And is there any more, I suppose, info you want to provide, or just, I suppose, tips the investors could find useful that they could get, ways you've seen other people extract more value out of the program as well? Because we find any type of, I suppose, event like this, whether you're bringing together deal makers and investors, typically find that the collaboration and other opportunities get created from this type of attendee. Is there any sort of other tips you'd like to provide?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole focus of the program is to help investors develop their own investment thesis. What do I invest in? When do I invest in? How much will I write a first check for? All those things that, what type of people do I want to invest in? But I think the important part of this is exactly those sort of conversations that you're talking about, and they sort of help put the meat on the bone, I guess. So we have office hours every day where the people who go on the program at the end of the day can book time in to talk to mentors, or in fact the faculty who are teaching on the program. The last day of the program, the attendees are asked to produce their investment thesis and publicly present it, and they get feedback on that. And then a month or so down the track, we've actually partnered with StartMate, and we're going to have a demo day with StartMate. So people can actually sit there and watch founders pitch and decide whether that's the sort of thing they can test their investment thesis on the pitches that they see via the StartMate program.
Fantastic. So basically, as a high-level summary for listeners, the VC Catalyst program, it's effectively a one-week executive education program. There's optional modules on legal, tax, and also the process of raising a fund. As mentioned from Colin just then, there's also a demo day. There's a follow-up of 6 months of mentoring. And I think one of the most valuable things you add there is that ongoing alumni program, which often ends up being a highlight, I imagine, for most people involved.
But we often find with any executive education program that the ongoing relationships where people have, I guess, started putting what they've learned into practice but the ability to sort of talk to each other. As you know, we often talk in innovation about ecosystems, and we just find that often it's about having good conversations and the ability to get feedback from other people who are working in the same industry.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for your time today, Colin, and obviously look forward to sharing more information and having more conversations like this in the future.
Thanks, Stephen, and we really appreciate your support. As you would have taken from my comments, this is a pretty significant issue for investors and for us as Australians, I think. So we're very appreciative of the wholesale investor support and your personal support.
No problems. You're welcome. Thanks,
Steve. Bye now.